Hail, fellow travelers. Tim from Secret Fire Books here. It is a beautiful day today. The sun is shining, the birds are singing, the grass is growing, which means there is a ton of pollen in the air. My sinuses are acting up. I apologize if I sound kind of raspy throughout the rest of this video. But as always, I'm going to power through it. It is the month of April, which means it is time for APE-ril. Now, this is a reading event created by the outlaw Levi Wallace, celebrating apes in fiction, any kind of apes or monkeys or simians of various kind. If you want to take part in this reading event, just read any book or short story or comic or watch a movie or something involving apes or monkeys and talk about it on your channel. It's just a good excuse to have some fun and monkey around a bit. Now, back in March, when Levi asked me if I wanted to be part of this event, I got really excited because I thought this would be the perfect excuse to dive back into a series of books that I had started reading a couple years ago, and that was the original Tarzan novels by Edgar Rice Burroughs. I had read Tarzan of the Apes back in 2024, and I thought it was high time I got around to some of the sequels. And this really isn't going to be that much of a book review, so much as it is kind of telling you guys my experience of the first two books in this series. Because as I found out, these first two books are completely different from each other. Now, going into this, way back in 2024 when I read Tarzan of the Apes for the first time, going into this, I had a set image in my mind of what Tarzan would be. I feel like anyone my age who grew up in the late 90s and the early 2000s has that same image. And it's the image of the Disney movie. Whether the older folks like it or not, that was our Tarzan. That was what Tarzan was to us. I remember my parents renting this video for me from the video store and from the library multiple times, and I absolutely love this movie. It was a fantastic, good time. I still think it's one of Disney's best animated movies to this day. And as much as some of the old guard will probably hate me for saying this, I don't think it veers away too heavily from the source material, at least compared to some other adaptations that Disney has made. It's not an absolute butchering of the source material. I think it stays fairly true to the spirit of the original novel. But regardless, that was what I assumed Tarzan was. And so going into Tarzan of the Apes, I had it built up in my mind that that's what Tarzan was going to be. And not only was I very wrong, I was pleasantly surprised with just how wrong I was. If I'm being honest, I didn't know if I would actually like Tarzan of the Apes. It was a cool concept, the idea of a man being raised by animals in the jungle and discovering other human beings for the first time. I thought that was a cool concept, but I always figured that since this book was really old, it was over 100 years ago, back in 1912, I believe, when this novel was first serialized in Argosy All-Story magazine. I thought it's such a classic concept that the original version, the old antiquated version, can't be all that good. And to be fair, Edgar Rice Burroughs' writing style is an older, more antiquated style. It is very much, it shows a lot of evidence of him and other writers of his time just coming out of the Victorian period and still having that frame of mind going into novel writing. Because even though they are pulp stories, they do have that kind of Gothic Victorian writing style. I'm really rambling at this point. The point I'm trying to make is that I thought it might be a little too old-fashioned for my liking, but I was very wrong. And I was amazed at just how much I loved Tarzan of the Apes. It was a fantastic adventure novel. I really can't recommend it enough. There were some things I could complain about. Like I said, Edgar Rice Burroughs' writing style is sometimes a little too antiquated for my liking, especially with his dialogue. But for the most part, it was just a lot of fun. It was a fast-paced adventure. The action was very brutal, very savage, as it should have been. And the world building, this fictionalized version of Africa that Edgar Rice Burroughs had created was so perfectly conceptualized and executed, I thought. All of Tarzan's interaction with the other animals and the lore behind the different species of animals, how they each have their own names and their own kind of cultures, was really interesting to me. And just as interesting was seeing Tarzan slowly discover his human roots and come into his own. Now, again, it is a a little awkward in the way that is developed. Tarzan somehow teaches himself how to read and write and speak French just from finding some old books that were left in his parents' cabin from when they were washed on the African shore after a mutiny. But aside from that bit of, hand wavy, he's really intelligent, so he just learned how to do it on his own. Aside from all that, I thought the story progression worked really well, and the character of Tarzan himself was really, really intriguing. And when the novel was finally over, I felt compelled to read the rest of the series because it kind of does end on a cliffhanger, and I genuinely wanted to know where the characters' adventures would go from there. But for whatever reason, I just kind of put it off until recently. Recently, I finished The Return of Tarzan, the second book in the series. And as much as I love Tarzan of the Apes, and I think everyone should give this novel a shot, especially if they want to see how a lot of the tropes of the pulp adventure genre were conceptualized by Edgar Rice Burroughs himself. This book, where do I even start? I guess I should start by saying that it took me almost a month, almost 30 days to finish this book. I started it in the middle of March, and I only finished it just a couple of days ago. Because unlike Tarzan of the Apes, this was one of the most difficult reading experiences I've had in a long time. So, like I said, this isn't going to be much of a book review. This is going to be more so me comparing and contrasting. No, I can't even talk today. The allergies are acting up. Comparing and contrasting my experiences with Tarzan of the Apes and The Return of Tarzan. And hopefully, those of you who have read the series, other books in the series before, can help me figure out whether or not I'm just insane. Am I imagining the vast gulf of difference between this book and this book? And should I continue reading the series? Because if we're going purely off of what I read in The Return of Tarzan, I just might drop this series from my entire reading list. Firstly, I want to compare and contrast how these two books handle probably my favorite element of any adventure story, which is the action. Now, as I already said, in Tarzan of the Apes, the action is very savage. It's very visceral. Tarzan, as a human being raised by apes and growing up in the savage jungle, has a lot of disadvantages. He doesn't have fangs. He doesn't have claws. He doesn't have a tough leathery hide or any of the other natural defenses that the wild animals were born with. He is very vulnerable. From the moment that the ape tribe adopts him to the moment he discovers human civilization for the first time, Tarzan's life is a constant fight for survival. And Edgar Rice Burroughs makes it very clear that at any moment, this vulnerable human being could be torn to shreds by a wild animal. As physically strong as Tarzan becomes, there are creatures in the wilderness who are stronger than he is. And so usually he ends up surviving through a mixture of wit and intelligence and just his sheer human will to survive. And it makes those action sequences so much better. Tarzan is in the thick of it. He's rolling around the jungle with some fierce animal. They're scoring hits on him. He's bleeding from dozens of wounds on his body, and it seems like death is near, but then he pulls through somehow and prevails. And when he's standing over the corpse of his enemy and delivering his triumphant war cry, it's just so satisfying. Tarzan worked for that victory. He faced the odds, and he came out on top, despite how stacked the odds against him were. The problem with The Return of Tarzan is that for the first half of the novel, Tarzan isn't fighting for survival. In the first half of this novel, Tarzan is at the top of the food chain. He is top dog, because he spends the first half of the novel among other humans. The first 105 pages of this book take Tarzan out of the jungle and put him into human civilization. The first batch of chapters have him running around the slums of Paris. Yes, a dangerous place for a normal human being to be, but for Tarzan, who has fought, savage gorillas and lions and come out on top, it's not that big of a challenge. And so the tension drops significantly for those action sequences where he's just beating up random thugs in an alley. Then a little later, we have him traveling through the deserts of northern Africa, and you think, well, okay, maybe he'll get into some cool pulse-pounding action this time. And it seems like at this point, Edgar Rice Burroughs has forgotten how to write action sequences involving Tarzan, because at this point, Tarzan's using a gun. The guy who wrestled gorillas to death with his bare hands is using a gun. I'm sorry, but when Tarzan kills a lion with a rifle, delivering that triumphant war cry of his just doesn't have the same oomph to it. You know what I'm saying? It wasn't until the latter half of this novel that Tarzan got back to his home jungle and once again experienced that savage fight for survival that he went through in the first book. But by then, it was just kind of too late for me, and I'd really kind of lost interest in this character's adventures. It seemed at this point that Tarzan had just fully come into his own as a character. He was top dog. He had met human civilization and proved that he was better than any of the other humans in that civilization. So it just seemed at this point that he was just kind of, I don't know, invincible, I guess. And apparently he gets even more invincible later on in the series. Also, I know that Edgar Rice Burroughs had this fascination with Victorian-era aristocracy, but the streets of Paris and the drawing rooms of wealthy estates are not a good substitute for, the vast, mysterious, eldritch jungles of uncharted Africa. They're just not. I don't want to see Tarzan in a drawing room having discussions with countesses and barons. I get that Edgar Rice Burroughs is saying, oh, he's a savage human being who doesn't belong here, but you're spending way too much time putting him there. I just don't understand how it took Edgar Rice Burroughs so long to take his character out of the place that clearly wasn't his element and put him back into his element. It's like he tried to prove a point that Tarzan didn't fit in with human civilization. And the readers are agreeing. I'm agreeing. Tarzan doesn't fit in with human civilization. So put him back in the freaking jungle. But no, we get like 100 more pages of him talking to random, stuffy, wealthy people and going on pleasure cruises and sitting in smoking rooms and drinking absinthe. Oh, it's so stupid. I also need to touch on something that I mentioned earlier. Edgar Rice Burroughs, his dialogue is just sometimes so painful to read through. Now, the thing is, in the original Tarzan of the Apes, there's not all that much dialogue. For a big portion of this book, there is zero dialogue at all. Tarzan is living in the jungle amongst the animals. If they have any conversations, it's in the simple, straightforward talk of the animals. There's no real elocution or proper speech or anything. When he does meet other humans, the conversations get a little bit longer-winded. But, I can ignore that because at the very least, he is still fighting for survival in this savage jungle. But in The Return of Tarzan, there's so many interactions with other human characters, which means there's so many more long, drawn-out conversations. And they're just so boring and just overly written. Edgar Rice Burroughs' prose is not overly purple, but his dialogue is straight up violent. There are even scenes where characters are in a situation that should call for, a bit of action, a bit of, going and doing instead of talking about it. And yet you get these long, drawn-out conversations that seem so unrealistic considering their context. For example, there's a scene where some characters get shipwrecked and they're in a lifeboat just floating on the open ocean, praying for people to come rescue them. And they're clearly dying of heat exhaustion and hunger and thirst. And yet they keep having these ridiculously long, drawn-out conversations. My, Mr. Clayton, I dearly hope someone comes and rescues us soon. This ghastly sun is simply awful for my complexion. I don't know how I'd face the ladies back home.
Right, jolly good, exactly what I was thinking, Miss Porter. It would be simply beastly of them not to even attempt a rescue mission. Now then, everyone gather around and draw lots. We need to decide which one of us we're going to cannibalize in order to stay alive.
That's an actual conversation that happens in the book, by the way. I'm not joking. I'm barely exaggerating the dialogue. But for me, the biggest, the most noticeable, and by far the most aggravating difference between these two books is the focus. In Tarzan of the Apes, there is one single focus. This is the story of a man who is raised by apes, survives growing up in the jungle, meets other human beings, and thus finds his own humanity. Everything that happens in this book, whether or not it seems related, eventually ties back into that concept, and it keeps the whole novel together in a beautiful way. In The Return of Tarzan, the focus, and thus the story, is all over the place. Things happen just because. Tarzan becomes romantically entangled with a French baroness and almost kills her husband because. The French baroness's brother is a Russian spy, and he and Tarzan encounter each other multiple times throughout the story and try to kill each other. Because. Tarzan befriends an Arabian sheik and they go lion hunting in the desert. Just because. Tarzan encounters a tribe of African warriors and he becomes their new chief. Because of course he does. Then he finds this ancient, lost civilization deep in the African jungle. It's made up of these mutant ape people who worship a sun god, and they have this great storehouse of gold that Tarzan steals just because. Everything that happens in Tarzan of the Apes happens because the story is about a man rediscovering his humanity. Everything that happens in The Return of Tarzan just kind of happens. And I hate it! So at the end of the day, even though I am more than willing to read some other Edgar Rice Burroughs novels, I just don't know if I'll be moving forward with the rest of the Tarzan series. As much as I love that first book, and I really, really do love that first book, this second one left a bad taste in my mouth. I need the help of those of you who have read the series before. Let me know in the comments below. Are the other Tarzan sequels of the same quality as Return of Tarzan? If so, I don't know if I'm going to be able to read any of them because you'll be in my heart. Yes, you'll be in my heart. From this day on, now and forevermore. You'll be in my heart. No matter what they say. You'll be here in my heart, always.